and thank you for coming to my lecture, How Beginner Violin Books Stack Up, a Teacher's Content Analysis. As violin teachers, we often find ourselves faced with a multitude of options when it comes to selecting teaching materials for our students. From traditional method books to specialized supplements, the choices can be overwhelming, but behind each book lies a unique approach to pedagogy, reflecting different priorities and philosophies on how best to introduce students to the violin. In this lecture, I'll explore how different beginner violin books sequence concepts and prioritize skills. By understanding these nuances, we can tailor our teaching approach to better meet the individual needs of each student. Before I dive into these specifics, I want to emphasize the importance of flexibility and open-mindedness in our teaching practice. We may gravitate towards certain method books in our teaching, or supplemental resources that align with our teaching philosophies, but that's sometimes at the expense of considering what's truly best for each student. As teachers, while we may have our own preferences, often based on our experience, it's essential to remain receptive to new ideas and approaches. By actively listening to our students, observing their progress, and adapting our teaching methods accordingly, we can create a more inclusive and effective learning environment. My project, Analyzing Beginner Books, is an attempt to broaden my knowledge of instructional material available to teachers and students today. I want to become an expert librarian when choosing materials for my students, and I want to streamline the process for other teachers to also familiarize themselves with all of these books. I am passionate about teaching with a student-centered approach, and I hope to share that with others. I strongly believe that we can empower our students to reach their full potential, not only as musicians, but human beings, if we create a personalized, supportive, and nurturing learning environment. This lecture will discuss the pedagogical differences between method books and supplemental books, examples of pedagogical priorities reflected in book sequencing, how and why to consider student variables when choosing books, and how a diverse library of learning materials helps the private teacher create an inclusive studio and achieve impactful results. I want to acknowledge that there are many ways to teach the violin. My analysis of beginner books is grounded in the understanding that there are many valid methods and perspectives in violin pedagogy. This lecture reflects my own perspective, shaped by my experience and opinions. However, it's crucial to recognize that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to teaching. What works for one student may not work for another, and teaching is a dynamic process that evolves to meet the unique needs of each learner. This project does not attempt to define the most effective methods of teaching. Instead, I invite you to engage with my insights, challenge them, and explore how they may align or diverge from your own beliefs and practices. The diversity of opinions and approaches within the teaching community is what enriches our collective understanding and fosters innovation in violin pedagogy. Allow me to briefly introduce who I am. I am a violinist, musician, performer, and lifelong student of the violin, always searching for better ways to approach playing the instrument and how to teach it to others. I also have a patient and nurturing spirit that makes working with kids a joyful and connection-filled experience. These parts of who I am have led me to teaching music in one-on-one environments, where I've discovered my love for teaching beginners. For perspective on my point of view and experiences, here's a look at what my teaching currently looks like. I have 16 violin students, 19 piano students, many of whom I teach both instruments, and 15 preschool students aged 3 to 5. There are many variables which make my students different from one another, impacting the way I teach them. There is age, cognitive development, attitude, personal interests, pace of learning, practice habits, parent involvement, and access to technology. And all of this is without any diagnosed learning disorder. This is a lot of important variables that make each student's learning situation different. Sometimes one of the biggest variables that impacts the success and enjoyment of music lessons is what our goals are altogether. When teachers and students are not on the same page, it can lead to frustration, dissatisfaction, and a lack of engagement with the learning process. Teachers understandably invest considerable amount of time and effort into crafting lessons that align with their pedagogical approach and goals. When these efforts are not appreciated or supported by students and parents, it can leave teachers feeling undervalued and disrespected. Have you ever heard of teachers complaining about giving music lessons that feel more like babysitting? Similarly, students may feel demotivated and unenthusiastic about music lessons if they perceive them as a chore rather than a joyful pursuit. For this reason, connection has always been a very high priority in my teaching. Connecting with my students, showing them I care and that I want to understand them, lays a foundation for more meaningful engagement in learning the violin. My analysis of beginner violin books has resulted in two categories of materials. There are supplemental books and method books. And understanding the difference between these categories makes the large collection much more manageable to explore. Method books are books which cover a range of topics with the goal of introducing the instrument to a student in a comprehensive manner. Here's a quick look at the many method books available to violin teachers and students today. All of these books are part of my content analysis project. If you're wondering why there's so many, it's not that we haven't cracked the code on how to teach the violin, there just isn't one way. Supplemental books are designed to be added to a student's learning routine for deeper understanding, integration, and practice of specific skills. These books are intended to be paired with other books, supplemental or method, to structure a comprehensive and individualized learning sequence for students. There are several different types of supplemental books. Their topics range from scales, literacy development, and technical studies to specific targeted skills. Before diving into what all of these books are, it's helpful to think about why we use books in the first place. Books serve as a crucial aid for review and practice at home, where students can revisit concepts and techniques taught during their lessons. Given the limited time available in lessons, books offer a way for students to consolidate their learning independently, ensuring that important details are not overlooked. Books also offer a tangible representation of progress and the student's excitement for learning. For progress, books offers a tangible map of learning, and finishing a book offers a moment of celebration for completing something, which is really important because when learning an instrument, there will always be something new to learn or do better through the next book or next piece that a student works on. I have found in my teaching that books also spark a fresh excitement for learning. Many times I have experienced students of mine losing their motivation and interest, and if I simply add a book to their mix, it sparks a new excitement for them. Books also have considerable benefits for the teacher. Books provide guidance and structure, offering a predetermined sequence of concepts and exercises that help streamline the teaching process. However, it's important to recognize that the effectiveness of a book sequence may vary depending on the individual teacher's pedagogical preferences and priorities. Like many others, when I started teaching violin, I had a lot of beginner students. On our first recital, I realized that more than half of my students were playing the same thing, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I asked myself, what's so special about Twinkle? Why isn't everyone playing Row, Row, Row Your Boat, or I'm a Little Teapot, or any number of other commonly known nursery tunes? I got the sense from my students that their performances also felt less special because they were just playing the same thing as everyone else. Looking back at when I started teaching, I didn't really know the right way to start, so I referenced resources online that gave advice and instruction on how to approach the first lessons. The common thread that I found was that students start in a pre-twinkle stage, and the goal of the beginning lessons is to get them to the twinkle stage where they're playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. So now I ask myself why this is. It could be because the incredibly well-established method of Suzuki starts with Twinkle. Or it could be that Twinkle really is the most reliable nursery tune that students always know. After all, many of us learn our alphabet with the melody. When teaching my students Twinkle, I also found myself conflicted about how I was teaching the left hand. When I introduced students to placing the fingers for the first time, I was teaching them in the ascending motion, placing the index finger then the middle, then the ring. But when playing Twinkle, students have to play in the descending motion. Twinkle starts with 2 open strings, which is great for beginners in practicing crossing the string. And then students put down the first finger on the E string, which again is great and aligns with how I'm teaching placing the fingers. But then Twinkle goes right into the descending finger pattern down the A string. Because of this discrepancy in how I was teaching finger placement and what my students were playing, I started to supplement ascending scales alongside teaching Twinkle. Today, I'm exploring if there are other common tunes like Twinkle that have ascending finger patterns that could possibly fill Twinkle's place in the early violin learning stages. Here are some examples from books I've explored. They are not perfect replacements for Twinkle for various reasons, mostly because of the rhythmic requirements of the melodies. And I'll also share some ideas that I haven't found in books yet. First, we have Brother John, which can be found in the book Fiddle Time Starters. This starts with the ascending finger placement, but it uses descending in the second line. Another example is You Are My Sunshine. This can be found in Fiddle Primer. The ascending finger placement is used quite a bit, but rhythm is much more integral to the tune, where Twinkle rhythms can be changed. Some of the best examples I found are in the Violin Fun Book. We have Oh Susanna and Pop Goes the Weasel. Pop Goes the Weasel uses nearly exclusively rising patterns. Here are a couple examples of tunes that I've written out. I haven't found in books yet. The original tune is like Brother John, where we see ascending finger patterns, but then later on there is also descending. So on the top there is the original tunes. In red is the ascending patterns, and in purple is descending. So on the bottom I have written out the tunes with simplified modifications so that there aren't those descending patterns. I'm going to play those briefly so that you can hear what that sounds like with the simplified content. In some books where these tunes are slightly modified to be made simpler. Here's an example of Yankee Doodle from Kasha Harvey's book, Knowing the Notes for Violin. She clearly also has a preference for teaching the ascending finger pattern. We have the ascending finger pattern in the first 2 lines. Outlined in green is where she changed the tune slightly to take away the more complex notes and descending patterns. So introducing finger placement in the ascending versus descending motion is an example of a pedagogical preference or priority. Another example is the use of finger numbers instead of note names. Some teachers take this approach to simplify left-hand learning. Referring to notes with the fingers that will play them connects the cognitive with the physical. Finger numbers also limit the number of options to choose from when translating staff notation to physical playing. With finger numbers, there are 5 variables. You can use the first finger, second, third, fourth, or no fingers. And the physical mechanism is going to be the same across all the strings. So number 1 will be the same finger on every string, which will be played with the index finger. This is not the case with letter names because letters don't signify a consistent placement on the fingerboard, and there are many more variables to choose from. Finger numbers can also simplify the student's translation of staff notation to playing notes on the violin. I've always seen value in sequences that tackle one step at a time. Narrowing the number of variables in note reading makes it more approachable. Once my students have a strong understanding of where the open strings live on the staff, note reading is simplified to a sequence of a few questions. The first question is the note on a line or a space? And there are 2 possible answers, line or space. If the note is on a space, then there are 2 options. It is either an open string or a second finger. If the note was on a line, it would either be played by a first or third finger. So this approach narrows the amount of options that students have when figuring out how to play notes. The benefits of simplifying the left hand are great in some contexts, but it delays a student's learning pitches and their relationship with others. In addition, if the student is not taught note names well before shifting is introduced, their entire process for reading staff notation will be uprooted, which is incredibly discouraging. Here are 2 examples of finger numbers being used in books by author Kasha Harvey. In Learning the Violin, Book 1, there's extra large font that shows finger numbers only, great for our youngest students. Limiting the amount of cognitive stimuli to process is always helpful. On the right is an example of finger numbers used alongside staff notation. A great book that I've discovered is Knowing the Notes for Violin, again by Kasha Harvey. This book is designed to teach students pitch names after they spent a considerable amount of time in finger numbers alone. So for all exercises throughout the book, notes are labeled with numbers until that specific note is addressed, then it is labeled as the note name for the remaining pages. Learning the violin requires many skills for the teacher to juggle without overwhelming students, losing their interest, or discouraging them. To get started playing the violin, there are skills to develop on both sides of the body, and students also have to work on coordinating those skills. Trying to teach too many concepts simultaneously can result in cognitive overload for students, but focusing on one skill at a time helps students experience success more regularly, making learning more rewarding for all parties. This is a reason that supplemental books can be incredibly valuable. In supplemental books, students can be working on multiple skills at a period of time, but focus on one individual skill at a time. Having books that target specific skills empowers students and teachers to set priorities and structure training so that more skills are addressed without burnout. Pedagogical priorities impact the sequence and timeline of teaching skills and concepts. Another common clashing preference between teachers occurs between the methods of how information is fed to students. On the one hand, teachers can model skills for students with demonstration and teaching students how to listen and repeat material. On the other hand, teachers can first teach students the skills and tools they need to work through material more independently, increasing the cognitive load, but empowering students with the ability to understand concepts more fully. Teaching through modeling and listening skills allows students to focus on physical aspects of playing that are quite awkward at the beginning. It's also valuable for students to get an early start learning what to listen for when they're playing. The modeling and ear training approach also has limitations. Students become dependent on their teachers and on recordings to learn any new material. With note reading being delayed, sight reading can become a challenge for students as they enter into environments like orchestra. In addition, this learning approach results in playing from memory. And though not always, there's a risk of students learning to trust their muscle memory over understanding concepts that they are playing. In contrast, if teachers take an early literacy approach, students are taught the skills and tools needed to learn independently, empowering them to take charge of their learning. When students can read music, they don't need their teachers or recordings to spoon feed them every note. Developing that strong sight reading skill helps students learn music faster and understand musical concepts more fluently. This prepares them for environments like orchestra. In addition, this literacy training streamlines the cognitive coordination from visual stimuli to the physical movements, making sheet music an asset in performance. It's important to also recognize the limitations of this approach. The visual demands of learning to read music take students' attention away from the physical techniques they're working on. These visual demands can also cause cognitive overload for students, resulting in overwhelmed feelings and discouragement, and resulting in, ultimately, resistance to the learning. Here are some method books we're going to look at today that align with the pedagogical priorities I just described. On the left, we have Violin and Suzuki, which prioritize ear training and listening skills through a sequence of repertoire modeled by teachers and recordings. The other two methods are A Tune Day and Maya Bang, which systematically teach students concepts step by step so that literacy can progress alongside physical playing. So let's take a closer look at each method. The Suzuki Violin School is a widely used and trusted method internationally. Suzuki is often described as the mother tongue method, as it is based on the idea that children can learn music the same way that they learn their primary language, by ear and immersion. The method stresses the importance of parent involvement and access to recordings so that students can listen to the music daily to develop musical sensitivity. This book is repertoire focused, meaning that the book outlines a sequence of repertoire, but the teacher is responsible for filling in any gaps along the way. Techniques used in the repertoire are not prepared by the book itself. Other characteristic elements of the learning sequence in Suzuki is that rhythm variations are introduced early on, and the finger placement is introduced with the descending motion in Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. This chart shows the Suzuki repertoire sequence and what new skills each piece requires of students. The sequence starts with Twinkle, which involves playing on the A and E strings, using the bow, making string crossings, placing and lifting left-hand fingers in the finger pattern of 2 and 3, half step apart, and in the descending motion. There are also several rhythms that the student is playing. Next, we have Lightly Row, which applies the ascending finger pattern. Then Song of the Wind introduces the bowing techniques of staccato articulation and doing retakes. As you can see, each piece involves a new musical concept. Here's the sequence continued. In perpetual motion, students skip fingers and use the pinky for the first time. Allegretto is the first time students play on the D and G strings. Etude includes a new finger pattern with a half step between the first and second fingers. And then we get into the Bach minuets, which involve many new skills. These are the unprepared techniques in the Bach minuets. Minuet 1 requires hooked bowings, the alternating of finger patterns for the first time, the first occurrence of accidentals, and the first piece that is in 3/4 time with dotted half notes. Minuet 2 has even more unprepared techniques. Students will play multi-string jumps, slurs, bow articulation changes, triplets, string crossings and slurs, and a new finger pattern all in one piece. And these aren't just the skills that they are employing, these are the brand new skills. So these minuets are also considerably longer than anything else they've played in the book. Luckily, Minuet 3 uses all the same skills, so students had 2 pieces to work on integrating them all. But this is a lot to tackle at once. I will now play the 3 Bach minuets. Follow along with the score to see each unprepared technique in action. For everything marked in color, imagine being a student and these sections involving material that is completely new to you. Is it overwhelming? Each of these unprepared skills can be found in different supplemental books. Between each minuet, I will demonstrate excerpts from different books that could be used to support students while learning these Bach minuets. The hooked bowings in this minuet can be found in Fiddle Magic in these exercises. There are 2 exercises in the book that work on these hooked bowings. I will demonstrate number 2, Inchworm. Minuet 1 also introduces accidentals and alternating finger patterns across strings for the first time. And there are also exercises in Fiddle Magic that address these things. I will demonstrate number 12, stepping high, stepping low. And so on with the D and G strings. Being exposed to music in 3/4 time and dotted half notes might seem like a simple thing, but it being consolidated into a short piece or exercise, not alongside so many other new things for students to be learning, is incredibly helpful. There are many examples that you can find. The one that I am going to be playing is London Eye from Violin Star 1. Because students aren't only playing dotted half notes, they are also playing quarter notes in groups of 3, so the teacher knows that the student is understanding the counting in 3. Here is minuet number 2. So this minuet uses multi-string jumps. Exercises to work on this can be found again in Fiddle Magic by Sally O'Reilly. I will demonstrate number 3, ski jump. crossings in slurs, and again, the multi-string crossings, can be worked on in this wonderful book, Open String Bow Workouts by Kasha Harvey. This book is entirely made up of open strings, and I'm going to play workout number 34 so you can see an example of the multi-string jumps and string changes in slurs. There is also a triplet in a slur pattern of 3 for the first time in the minuet 2. So I'll demonstrate a study that a student could play. Here's 2 examples from the book Violin Playtime Studies, and I'll be playing number 21, Dreaming. Here's more examples of string changes in slurs. There are 2 examples in Super Studies, which is another book of technical exercises. I'm going to demonstrate number 8, Wave Machine. Here is the minuet number 3. A lot of the same techniques that we've been playing in minuet 1 and 2 are also in this minuet. So listen for all of those being worked on again. So let's say that the Suzuki method does align with your pedagogical priorities and preferences. It's important to still consider all of the student variables that could impact a student's success with this method. Here's an example. You get a sweet 4-year-old student who is overjoyed by the thought of playing the violin and has begged her parents to take lessons. She can't wait to make music. You do your best to set up her posture and bow hold, but she's just so antsy to start playing music. You try to teach her sliding on the magic X to set up the left hand shape and placement, but her little hand just lashes onto the neck of the violin with a tight squeeze. You question if her little fingers are even long enough to properly position and be placed. Can this student learn the violin yet? The answer is a giant, joyful yes. And specific methods make that possible. Violin is an example of a method that would be a great option for this student. Before we dive into what this method offers, let's consider another scenario. Say the student isn't just too small and too young to jump into finger placement, but the student instead is experiencing stress and losing interest from trying to integrate too many things at once. They start to say that violin isn't fun, violin is too hard, and they're just suddenly too tired to try anything. Violin offers students an extension of the early learning stages with fun and engaging music that they love to play. And I can say from personal experience that my students truly do love this music. Violin is a very new method. It was created by Crystal Boyack and came out in 2022. The method focuses on the setup and development of the right hand. So posture, bowing, and rhythms are emphasized most. Students get the opportunity to engage with a variety of music while regularly achieving success and progressing through the book. Techniques are paced and prepared through a sequence of songs that are learned by ear and from teachers modeling. The book comes with recordings that can be accessed online. Crystal Boyack's main point with writing this method is to share what she thinks is the best way to teach Twinkle, and that is, don't teach Twinkle at all. Violin is comprised of music gathered from all around the world. Here's a look at the Violin sequence. Most of the songs in the books have lyrics to encourage singing along, to feel rhythms, and engage closer with the music. Songs come from various cultures and places. They're American, Spanish, Cuban, Maori, Ghanaian, Japanese, Congolese, Israeli, Irish, Chinese, Canadian, African American, Jamaican, Mexican, Sri Lankan, English, Brazilian, Argentinian, and Slavic. The first 10 songs in the book use the E string only, cycling through different rhythm variations. Once the A string is introduced, there are several songs that alternate between the E and A strings, with those same rhythm variations that students are familiar with. Once students get to the song John the Rabbit, the left hand is introduced for the first time with a harmonic on the A string. The fingers are then introduced progressively, starting with 3 in the descending motion. The last 3 songs in the book use the notes of Twinkle, 4 notes per Violin song. For these 3 songs, there's an extra challenge. Students will play the tune and cycle through all 5 rhythm patterns they have learned. This challenges their stamina and prepares them for what comes next. I'll demonstrate this sequence of rhythms with the first one of the 3 songs, Diddle Diddle Dumpling. When they do this, they are gifted with the realization that they have learned Twinkle without knowing it. Or if this doesn't matter to you as a teacher, it doesn't have to be addressed at all. As teachers, we know that they have learned the contents of Twinkle. I'm now going to play the last 3 Wee Violin songs back to back. At this stage, I like to call this the graduation song for students. Listen to how well you can hear the Twinkle tune. Throughout the book, all of the recordings include piano accompaniment and the violin part. This is the one exception. There's only piano so that students can pick any rhythm that they want to play. I'll demonstrate this by changing rhythms as the sequence cycles through each song. Here is the graduation song. Let's switch gears to the method books that prioritize cognitive understanding of musical concepts and the development of musical literacy. First, we have Maya Bay. Maya Bay was a student of Leopold Auer and compiled his method of teaching into a series of 7 method books. The method prioritizes literacy development by adding one element at a time and integrating concepts with plenty of practice. Some characteristics of the learning sequence are that the finger placements introduced with the ascending finger pattern, this is the first time we're seeing this today, various finger patterns are learned, and all strings are worked on equally. The systematic style of the sequence makes it pair well with the metronome, and all student repertoire is written as duets. Leopold Auer's fundamental principle of his method is to combine, quote, purely technical and musical needs at all times by providing a liberal amount of technical material and relieving it with melodious little pieces designed to interest the pupil and accustom their ear to pleasing and gratifying musical impressions from the very start. The book prioritizes left-hand development, which is explained in this quote from Maya Bay. With exercises offering difficulties for both the fingers and the bow, the left hand and the right hand, the task of mastering the technical details should be divided, owing to the fact that it is difficult for young pupils to concentrate simultaneously upon such different work as the right and left hands are called upon to execute. The entire attention of the pupil should be concentrated at first upon the fingers of the left hand, using a separate bow for each note, and only adding marked bowings when there is a comparative surety in intonation and finger action. So Maya Bay is acknowledging that it's very difficult for students to learn all of these new things at once. Maya Bay Book 1 the Maya Bay Book 1 contents fall into these categories: the introduction of notes and placement on the fingerboard, technical exercises, scales, etudes, and student repertoire, which are all duets. The book has 119 entries, and the first 30 of them are a slow introduction to open strings and adding fingers. All strings are worked on evenly, and fingers are progressively added in the rising pattern. Exercises start with open strings, and exercise for each string. Then they add the first finger, separate exercises for each string, and so on. I will show you this with a score in just a moment. So after this opening section of introducing the notes, the rest of the book cycles through the remaining categories. So there will be a technical exercise, a student duet, and scales and etudes mixed in. The 10 etudes throughout the book expose students to different time signatures, new note values, and slur patterns. Here's a look at the different types of technical exercises used throughout the book. Finger mechanics, bowing, rhythms, and string crossings are focused on. There is also some variety in the student repertoire. 10 etudes, 9 duets by classical composers, and 22 duets by the author Maya Bang, many of which are traditional and folk tunes arranged. These give students options for recitals as they work through the many technical exercises. So here is a look at one of those very first pages when the open strings are being taught. As you can see, note values are greatly emphasized, starting with quarter notes, then half notes, and then whole notes. So if students are not counting those note values or playing with the metronome, the exercises are incredibly repetitive. And then here is the example of when the second finger is being introduced. There are 2 different finger patterns being taught here. On the A and E string, we are learning the finger pattern with half step between 1 and 2, and on the D and G string, half step between 2 and 3. As you can see, it is the same concept of the exercises being the same with different note values on each line. So again, very important that students are counting those note values or using a metronome so that the exercises aren't too repetitive. I'm now going to play the first etude and the first student piece, and then the last etude and the last student piece, so you can kind of get a sense of how far the student goes from beginning to end of this book. Students are already playing the low 2 finger pattern and the low 1 on the E string. Jump to the end of the book with the 10th and last etude. The key signature is what makes this etude particularly challenging. Dear Old Mother by Grieg. Another method that is similar to Maya Bang is a tune-a-day. This method takes the same literacy approach, but remains much more simple technically. Here are the similarities between the methods. There are multiple exercises to practice each new technical concept. Literacy is trained. Notes are introduced with finger numbers and letter names simultaneously. Both books start with the finger pattern with the half step between 2 and 3. Counting of note values is emphasized, and student pieces are written as duets, offering 2 levels of material and musical engagement with the teacher. There are also several differences between the methods. Maya Bang is organized as 119 numbered entries, but a tune-a-day instead consists of 32 lessons. Though both books emphasize note values, they introduce them in opposite order. Maya Bang starts with quarter notes, and a tune-a-day starts with whole notes. The scales learned in each book determines the complexity of fingerboard understanding and the finger patterns being learned. In Maya Bang, the scales follow the circle of fifths, starting with C major. And there are also, in Maya Bang, the scales follow the circle of fifths, starting with C major and A minor. So students are learning 4 different finger patterns with those scales. In contrast, a tune-a-day remains much more simple with 3 scales that use only 1 finger pattern, G major, D major, and A major, with the half step between 2 and 3. Another major difference between the books is the extent that each string is worked on. In Maya Bang, strings are worked on equally, with each technical exercise repeated on each string verbatim. In contrast, a tune-a-day works extensively on the A and D strings throughout the book, and the G and E strings are briefly addressed, with 1 lesson each towards the end. All student pieces in Maya Bang are duets, where in a tune-a-day there are duets and true solos. The pedagogical priorities behind a tune-a-day method can be understood from this quote in the author's foreword to teachers. Paul Herforth says, quote, "Many teachers do the thinking for their pupils, instead of helping them to think for themselves. Insisting upon the mastery of each point will not dull their interest. What greater joy, whether it be child or adult, than to accomplish, achieve, and gain more power." The contents of a tune-a-day can be divided into 2 categories: technical exercises and student repertoire. Like Maya Bang, the first half of the book presents all student repertoire as duets, but then there are true solos found in the later part of the book. Of all the technical exercises in this book, 85% involve the introduction of new notes and note values. For students who are moving at a slower pace for any number of reasons, this can make the book a challenge to maintain interest and navigate feelings of discouragement. 85% is a huge chunk of the book. These methods that focus on technical mastery do include short student rep tunes and duets so that students have something to play when recital season rolls around, and to help students feel like they're playing music, not just studying music. These are great things for the right situation. But these methods considerably increase cognitive load, which is a good challenge for some and damaging of a challenge for others. Here's a look at how notes are introduced in the tune-a-day. As you can see, again, the counting of note values is emphasized, but we are starting with whole notes instead of quarter notes. On lesson 8, In Lesson 8, you can see how the fingers are introduced with exercises, the same notes but changing note values, just like in My Bang. There are then a few very short melodies to engage a student musically. Jumping ahead to Lesson 19 and 20, this is where the G and E strings are introduced for the very first time. All fingers are played in the exercises, followed by a short melody, then a scale, and I will play the short student pieces that conclude these lessons. Looking back at this quote from the author, many teachers do the thinking for their pupils instead of helping them to think for themselves. As teachers, I think it's important we have an awareness for what our students need from us and to always check in with that awareness. The student who isn't ready to figure out every step on their own will be ready for that one day. And the key for setting all of our students up for success is for teachers to pivot at the right time. Students will generally all learn the same things, just at different times and in different ways. Unfortunately, there isn't enough time today to explore all of the books in my content analysis, but here's a quick look at the categories of supplemental books and the type of content they offer. So here are some scale books. These all remain in the first position. Some of them cover major scales only. Some of them also include minor scales. So looking at the major scales only, they're still very different. One of them is very simple and the other very complex. The simple book introduces the scale with lots of space between the staff notation, in quarter notes alone, with two different visuals for students to understand how the scale works on the fingerboard. In contrast, this book is much more complex. There are more note values used, more exercises, more bowing exercises. The scale also goes into arpeggios, thirds, broken chords, and double stops. Some of the books are scales paired with student repertoire. Scaly Monsters is organized like this, where you have the scale on one page and the student rep on the next. The staff notation is also included with the quarter note scale written on the staff, and then a visual, which they call a dinosaur footprint map, which is very cute, which shows the finger patterns that students will be using. Each page also has a different dinosaur name for students to practice the rhythms along with their scale. And the student piece is always in the key that the scale is, of course, and either uses the arpeggio or the scale in a very specific way so that it's a great way for students to put into practice the key that they are working on. Fiddle Time scales is very similar, but it has more technical exercises along with the scales than full student pieces. This is the category of literacy books. There are several great literacy books. Many of them have extra large font, which is great for our youngest students learning to read for the first time. We looked at several of these technical study books earlier on. And there's also books that target specific skills like double stops, rhythms, and bowing. In conclusion, the journey of teaching and learning the violin is deeply personal and ever evolving. By thoughtfully integrating beginner books into our teaching, we create a structured yet flexible pathway for students to follow, fostering their growth and enthusiasm for music. These books not only serve as invaluable resources for reviewing and practicing at home, but they also mark significant milestones, celebrating the students' progress and reinforcing their passion for learning. As teachers, our goal is to balance guidance with openness, adapting our methods to meet the unique needs of each student. By prioritizing connection and understanding, we can create learning environments that encourage students to embrace the joys and challenges of learning the violin. If you would like to follow along with my content analysis of these beginner books, I'm posting my findings to this Instagram account, Violin Book Nook. You can scan this QR code to follow me. My future plans with this project are to potentially make YouTube videos that review the books, an anthology-style resource for other teachers, or an interactive website. Thank you for coming.